Well, hello everyone. We are live here with Amy Tessitore from Open LMS.
Hello.
And Amy, I'm gonna totally embarrass myself
Sure.
right off the bat.
Okay.
I don't know what your title is. I don't know what to call you.
My title is Senior Manager of Education and Engagement Services. So
Hot.
mhm.
That is fantastic. And all I know is you're also a sweet presenter. You presented at our
Thank you.
e-learning success summit last April. We're excited to have you again at our designer session. Our instructor session in May.
Mhm.
I always forget which finger. It's right here on May 4th. And so it's gonna be fantastic. And admittedly, everybody knows we're colleagues. I mean, we
Yes.
do work for the same company, which is
Mhm.
fine. But we wanted, you and I had this conversation, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we were talking about is, getting into the weeds about what actually happens behind the scenes as either a middle administrator or an instructor or something like that. And especially what happens when the stuff hits the fan, so to
Yes.
speak. And I suspect that you've probably heard these stories an awful lot.
I have.
But team me up. So wait, but as the director of education, like
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about that. What does that mean? What do you do for Open LMS and our clients, but then like the public writ large?
Yeah, so our academy operates publicly, so it's for everyone, whether they are a client of ours or they even use our learning management system or not. And so what I do is my role is to kind of understand the need out there in the industry, create courses, facilitated courses in response, and then I design those courses. And most of the time, I facilitate them with a couple of colleagues on my team. I also oversee the training program, and we offer training obviously for clients, but also for the public at large who are looking to understand more about using their LMS or teaching and learning online and things like that. And then I also work with clients on helping them with their product adoption, so getting them to understand like what are the things that your LMS can do for you and what do you do, how do you use that, how do you apply it, how do you make a great experience for both the people who are facilitating and teaching and then the people who are learning as well.
Mm. So what's the we're past 2 years into the pandemic. Actually, I guess we're coming right up to the second year anniversary, somewhere right around here, right? What you and I, we do this for a living. I've been doing
Mhm.
this for a while. You've been doing this for decades.
Yeah.
Wait, decade. I don't want to.
Decade. Let's
I don't want to. I don't.
don't artificially age me, please.
I mean, I've got gray hair everywhere. But anyway, what are still like the top 2 or 3 things that you hear from either someone coming into an LMS for the first time? Is it more about playing with the new flavor of an LMS, or are you still getting questions like, I'm not sure how to even bring my class online? Like, what are the things that you're normally fielding?
Yeah. So a lot of the questions that we're still getting right now are things like, I've moved content online, but it's not very engaging there. And how do I keep my learners engaged? And then recognizing that doing online learning is actually going to be something more for the long term. I think people initially move things on like kind of an emergency basis. And so developing that curriculum online, and people have a lot of questions about how do we do that? How do we take what we did in the classroom, match it to a digital tool, and create an effective learning experience for people? And I think that's probably the biggest question. The other is when people immediately had to start using their LMS, they don't know all of the functionality and tools
Mm,
and power in there, right? It was an emergency situation. They moved it online. They pieced together what they could, and often there wasn't a lot of training in that moment because so many other things were going on. And so
mhm,
we're seeing people ask questions like, "Can it do this?" or "How would I do that?" or "What do
mhm.
I do if something goes wrong?"
And do you find that quite often you're able to show, or one of our teammates is able to show them something where they're like, oh wow, that really saves me a lot of time, right? Like, I know that almost sounds like a tee up for a sales pitch, but like, honestly, do we find there's a lot of those aha moments?
We do, and sometimes they're very unsuspecting moments. It's something that, like, maybe you've been doing for a long time because we've been working, in this industry for a long time, and you share something very small and someone is it's life-changing for someone, and they become very excited, and sometimes it's just the small things. It's just, knowing that something exists and it can suit your need that really sparks the interest in people and then makes them wanna step further and further into using that LMS.
Mm, that's cool. All
Mhm,
right. Well, again, we were talking a couple of weeks ago about the challenges that can happen and some of
mhm.
those things. And so we had titled this live broadcast, What to Do When Everything Goes Wrong on Assessment Day. I love that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Um, I don't know what that means. I'm honestly, I've never, this is, pull back the kimono. I've never run a giant assessment for
Mhm.
either university or nine. So take us through what this problem looks like. Is this something that we see often? I know, is it just, is it a ghost in the machine problem? Is it something that people set up things wrong? Like, tee it up for me.
Yeah, so I've worked both as an online teacher using LMSs and then also as an admin. So I've seen it from both sides. Sometimes, you're going into an assessment day. It could be a standard formative evaluation as you're going through, or it could be your final exam, something really large, and something happens. The internet goes down, but you can't tell that that's what it is, or the quiz and the test isn't opening for everyone, or they're having a problem connecting to the site as a whole, or when they're done, they can suddenly see the questions and you didn't want them to be able to see the questions after they had submitted the test, or they see their grade too quickly. Those are some pretty common things that happen, and they can be really unnerving when they happen because despite what people think, even though testing can be stressful for learners, it's also kind of stressful for the people who are administering the test
Mm,
because you have a very specific plan. You often have a specific time frame that this test has to be given in, and you really need to figure out quickly what the problem is. But that can be hard when the stress and all of the emotions of the problem kind of bubble to the surface and you're not sure what to do next.
sure. So, it, top again, I guess my first question is top two or three things that you see that causes these situations. So, is it setting up the exam incorrectly? Is it not recognizing there's going to be a bigger load on the server? Is that too detailed? Like what are the things that
Nope, those
are
are
the
the top, definitely the top 2.
wow, right on. I got it right out
Right
of the
on.
bat.
Yeah,
Sweet.
I think it's setup is almost always it because the quizzes, the tests online have a lot of settings, and sometimes they are phrased in a way that's not really intuitive and you're not sure what they mean. And you inadvertently tick or don't tick a box, and then people can't get in, or they're seeing things they shouldn't, or they don't have the correct access. And then obviously server load is always a concern, especially when we launch a large scale test. And this is kind of true across all different platforms, but you launch a large scale test and you have everyone start at exactly 8 o'clock on the dot. So now you have, all these people coming in trying to load this test. And again, some of that comes back to the settings. So if I have a 100 question test and all 100 questions are trying to load at once at
Mm,
exactly 8 a.m. when 50 people come in, we kind of create some problems there when that happens. So,
mm.
but again, you can lessen that load on the database and in the servers by properly setting up the test. So really in the end, it almost always comes back to the setup.
Okay, cool. So what are your recommendations for I guess what I really like to hear is like small, medium, large kind of recommendations for the single class to like the small school to the university system. Like what do
Yeah.
those look like?
So I think for everyone, the first thing to do is always have a list of numbers or contacts so that you know who to contact if something goes wrong. For example, if the internet goes down, Wi-Fi is down and no one can connect, that's a different problem than if we get in and the test is timing out. So those are different people we're going to contact. So I always tell people have your list of numbers ready. Um,
Mhm.
Number one, doesn't matter what institution, organization, size you are in. The first thing is don't panic. Give yourself a specific amount of time that you're willing to spend trying to fix the problem in the immediate term. That will still allow you to deliver that test, give people the full amount of time on it. And if you can't fix the problem in that time frame, be ready to shift that test to another day if you need to.
Mm.
That's not always practical, though. Sometimes people are doing really large exams, such as large testing events for certifications and things, and you just can't shift things. So you definitely want to have a plan. I think my other thing that I recommend to everyone is to really get to know what the different settings are and avoid overkill. There are settings that you can put in place that kind of duplicate each other, and when that happens we almost always run into a problem where we've set one incorrectly and we're looking at the other and saying, but this date restriction is right, but we actually our open and close dates for the quiz didn't, or the test didn't line up, and so now nobody can get in.
What are
So I
your
think,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, like
go
I was
ahead.
just saying, can you give us some specific examples
Sure.
of some of those competing criteria maybe that sometimes you see?
Yeah. So, for example, most tests have an open and close date and time. So the test is there, but no one can get in and start it until, say, 3:24 at exactly noon, and that's when they can come in, and it's going to close at 1 p.m. and that's it. You can't get in otherwise. But then you might have an option to restrict access to that. And that's a little bit different setting. So when I restrict access, it means I can't even click into the test. So I couldn't click in and see that it's not ready for me to take yet if I had a restriction. If I just did an open and close date, I could click and it would say this quiz hasn't opened yet, or this test hasn't opened yet.
Mm.
But sometimes people set the open and close date and then add a restriction piece. So they have an access restriction, and they may have inadvertently restricted access based off of completion of a previous activity that wasn't necessary, or a date and time that doesn't match the open and close date and times. That's probably the number one conflict we see. So if I had my open time for the test at noon today, but my restrict access was actually set for 1 p.m., the quiz isn't even going to be there for people. They're not going to be able to click into it at all. They won't have access to it. And so I think that understanding what those settings are is key, so that you're not duplicating effort and accidentally stepping on the different restrictions you put in place.
Mm. For is what's the word I want to? Is it reasonable to ask? In for anyone creating an assessment, is it reasonable to ask to like put a buffer, like a 10-minute, 15-minute buffer before a test, and say, hey, look, this is where I'm trying to disaggregate the issues, the
Absolutely.
problems, like, and to say,
Yeah.
hey, look, let's make sure everybody can get online and actually has access, and can kind of
Mhm.
see, and maybe can log in, and then the test will start at 1:15, like from 1 to 1:15.
Mhm.
Is that something you'd recommend?
It's my number one recommendation, actually, if we have large scale. So I love the way you're thinking about it,
Yeah,
because
I feel like we've
you feel like
scripted this. I
yeah, I
don't
know,
know.
this
It's
is so
so weird.
strange today. That actually comes back to earlier when you said, can it be problems where we overload the server or the database or things like that? And the answer is, if we stagger the times and we let people start that test between 1 and 1:15, we still only give them an hour to finish it, no matter whether they start at 1 or 1:15. We stagger people coming in. And what this does is lets us know very early if there's an issue, gives us some time to fix it. And then same thing with restrict access. You don't need to restrict access if you're going to have an open and close time, because it's duplicative. But if you did, I would build a buffer in on either end. People are always going to be limited by the time limit you set on any given test. So it doesn't really matter if they access it at 11:55 or noon or 12:15, but it does give you time to figure out pretty quickly if there's a problem, and it allows you to build some extra time into your schedule in case there is a problem, so you have time to address those.
Mm. So, you know, prevention is usually the best way to solve a problem.
Yes.
What do you recommend for instructors, administrators, learning designers, whatever, about, you know, initially even creating an assessment and then, testing it? Like, my guess is that I'm many people will build this and assume it will work rather than actually, hey, have somebody run through it. So what's your recommendations on that?
Yeah, so my recommendations when we're building out a quiz is to think in terms of all of your users and what they might need. So as you're building out that quiz, think about, staggering some of those start times, limiting the number of questions per page, because that is a better user experience. It also makes the quiz or test more accessible. If we have all the questions on one page, it's a problem for screen readers. And then I would definitely build that and then take that test as a student, try it out. And you don't have to do that necessarily every single time, because in many learning management systems, you can build a quiz once and have all the settings, and then just duplicate the quiz and then populate with questions.
Mm,
So if I get the settings right the first time and I populate with just one or two questions to try it out, once those settings are exactly the way they need to be and I've tested them, I can actually duplicate that quiz multiple times and then add different questions in for each of the quizzes. Now I don't have to fiddle with the settings every time. I know what works and what doesn't. It also helps me to narrow down, if there's a problem, what that problem might be, because I know what my settings are. I didn't change them, nothing is different. So it helps me to pinpoint if there are any issues.
mm. My mind immediately goes to, if someone uses the same template over and over again, does that give students, a potential area to hack or anything like that? I'm kind of sort of thinking about, how do I maintain the security of my quiz and make sure, we sort of have that credibility and reliability?
Mhm. So really what you're doing is changing your access dates each time, right? So that unless they can get into the system as someone who's able to be an administrator of that quiz or test, so like a teacher or a site admin, then they're not going to be able to get in and make those changes. As far as like your test security goes, there are certain settings you can put in place, such as there are different lockdown browsers and things to prevent people from being able to screenshot tests, for example, so that they're not sharing questions, and that prevent them from navigating away to other web pages. So, some of your test security and improving your validity and reliability is going to depend on what type of monitoring software you choose to use or don't choose to use. Some people, make a choice not to use it because of the types of tests and assessments that they build out. There are a lot of other settings too. So, just because you have everyone always gets 60 minutes and it's going to open and close at certain times, there really isn't a way to kind of game the system on
Mm,
that per se.
mhm.
But there are other things such as, setting, length of time that someone can be in the quiz or test, and then being cautious. So, if I'm giving this test to section one of a course I teach, but section two doesn't take it until 2 days later, thinking about how you're going to make that work. And I like to create a larger test bank for that, a question bank,
Mhm.
and then randomly pull some of the questions so they're not the same between
Right.
the two different sections. Things like that do help to improve some of your test security.
Take me down that more philosophical, pedagogical or
Yeah.
andragogical, thought
Hmm.
process where I know a lot of the conversations that I've seen over the last couple of years are, you know, uh, related to the rigor of assessment, related to, is online learning really effective? Hey, my kid can just kind of take this test 100 times.
Right.
Is this great for adult learning? Like where, you know, walk me through the spectrum of, hey, this is definitely when a multiple choice quiz is going to be the right thing to use. And then there's, hey, maybe you should think of a different way to assess
Mhm.
knowledge. Like what, can you get a little philosophical on me for there?
Yeah. So, my personal philosophy is that multiple choice questions are good when we're trying to test recall and just basic knowledge. So, I've given you something, I'm giving you the options, pick one of these. I don't find multiple choice tests to be something that tests whether or not someone can synthesize the information or apply it very well. If we are looking to branch out from that, I am a fan of doing things like presenting a scenario in an assessment. So, and that can actually happen through an actual regular test that we could offer online. I might give them part of the scenario, and then maybe it's an essay style question, and they start to fill in some information. Or I ask people to create something and submit it as an assignment, so they could create, a flow chart, a diagram, a video. I really like where I like when we can allow people to synthesize and apply information in learning in a way where they're presenting something to us. So
Mm,
sometimes my assessments are things like make a podcast all
mm,
about this topic and tell me what you would do here. If you were going to teach a new teacher about something, how would you do that? What would you ask them to do? I try to get beyond things like the standard lab reports or lesson plans, and actually have people show me how they would apply this information and this learning in a real situation. And so there are lots of ways that we can do that. Some of those are high stakes tests where, they have to submit the information and we grade it. But other times it's things like allowing them to go through an interactive experience, like a branching scenario, where we actually look at what their thought process was, and how they made different decisions in this scenario, and where that led them. And then I asked them to do a reflective piece on that. What would you do? What would you change? What did you think you did well? What was something that surprised you that you weren't really prepared for, so that I can understand how their process for solving the problem, because that's just as important as them coming to a final answer. I think with
mm,
multiple choice, we all know that eventually you can randomly guess, and sometimes you'll get those questions right, and that's not always a great indicator of whether or not
mhm.
someone knows something or not.
What about the difference between adult learners, adolescent learners, and child learners in an online environment? Are there assessment options that you recommend for each, or it kind of plays out depending, it just depends?
Yeah, I think that when you are talking about young learners, people who are, K through 5 especially, who are still working on learning how to type. We're not really giving them keyboarding classes, but we're giving them a Chromebook and asking them to type things. It's not practical to ask them to create PowerPoints that have a lot of writing or essays, because it's actually so much more frustrating for them to try to type it out. We lose what we're trying to evaluate. We never really capture that. So for those things, I like to think of how I would have done things in the classroom. Can they do a couple math problems and then someone helps them to take a picture of it and that's what they send in? Or can I meet with them one on one like I used to do in my K through 2 reading groups, and they just read to me for a few minutes on an individual meet while the rest of the class is working on an activity somewhere else. Maybe they're doing something like Kahoot or
Mhm.
things like that. That was
Right.
popular when my children were in online
It's still
classes.
super popular. Kahoot is
It's
the thing.
fun. Um, when it comes to older kids, middle school, I think that, you know, part of what we need to capture in middle school in assessment is their thoughts and their views on things in some ways, because they're beginning to start to develop actual views on the information and ways that they think they could apply the information. And so when I think about assessments for like the sixth grade, seventh grade on up to, graduating high school, I like to make sure that I build in something where they can talk about how would you practically apply this? Why do you think it is or is not important? Often we discount in assessment whether or not someone finds something valuable. We just want them to find it valuable. We tell them it's valuable, but we don't listen to why they think it might not be. And so then we don't have information to improve the teaching as we go along so that we can help them to understand the value. But that age group is much better at typing. They're more adept at typing. They're by this point, they've probably been on, a computer for a while or social media. So they're pretty quick at typing and finding information. And so that's a good time to actually start to promote assessment where they're researching information. So open book or open internet, and they have to provide their sources. And then you can start to talk about how to find reliable sources for things. And that's a nice way to meet them in the middle with what their world is today and coupling that with what we're trying to get them to do, which is really to be able to have a process to solve problems. Similarly, when we get into college, you can do things very similarly. But when it comes to like corporate education, professional development, you don't have that kind of time. People
Mhm.
need to get in, they take their courses, they take their tests, and they move on. And I don't think a lot necessarily changes with that. I do like to give opportunity to do things like fishbowl. So we used to do a lot of face-to-face training, and that you would have like a problem you had to solve that was related. And If you do something like a fishbowl activity, you can even do them online with adult learners. You make it very short, but you have one group who solves the problem, and the other group is watching that and comments only on the process used to solve the problem. So I think you can still incorporate that type of assessment into corporate ed, but often you just need to show that people passed a test. And in that case, by all means, build a multiple choice test, set a minimum score to pass, give them as many attempts as they need, and let them go on their way. Because often what you need to show in a corporate environment is very different than what you need to show in any type of education sector.
Mhm. I've always been a big advocate that as an adult, I have yet to take a closed book, close whatever exam that I'm not allowed to, use every single
Yeah.
resource available to me. So
Yeah, it's not practical in your everyday life. There's never a time when someone says to you, "You can't Google that. You just need to know it." Like that's not reality. So I don't think we should replicate that in the professional environment when we're trying to test people.
I'm thinking scuba diver. You can't do that as a
That one
scuba
would be
diver.
tough. Yeah, probably don't have great cell service down there at the bottom of the ocean.
Do I have to worry about if I'm an instructor or an administrator? Do I have to worry about different types of access in terms of when I'm providing an assessment? So maybe some of my students are going to do this on a mobile device, some are going to do it on, in the computer lab, and some of them are going to do it on a laptop or a desktop or something like that. Is that something I need to worry about?
It is because mobile device usage is increasing for a lot of reasons. If the pandemic taught us nothing, it was that we do not have one to one device policies in our country. Most countries don't. But especially in education, we didn't. And so that meant we had people accessing using their parents' computer or on a mobile phone or on a tablet that they maybe had. And so, whenever you're creating an assessment, creating with mobile in mind is always important. And that's a good time to think back to not putting a lot of questions on a single page. So I would never recommend having more than 5 questions per page in an online assessment. People can page forward, but they're not stuck with trying to navigate lots of questions there. Also, keeping in mind that in some instances, your learners may not have reliable high-speed internet where they live or where they're going to be taking this particular test. And so it's important to know that, and know that you may need to set up something like a user override is something I do commonly, where that, these people might need to come take the test at a different time because that's the only time they can get to a computer lab or a library to take the test if they're in online learning. Or maybe I don't set a time limit, but I do set times when people are going to be able to access this quiz, and they can actually take it offline. And then when they connect their mobile device to the internet again, the quiz uploads for them. So it's really important to understand the ability to access things of the audience that you're teaching. And that changes from course to course, day to day, circumstance to circumstance. You could have a weather event and suddenly, half of the people in your class don't have internet or power. And so you have to compensate for that.
Hmm.
So I definitely think designing for mobile, and then also thinking about where you live and what the options are there for internet off site of wherever you're teaching or where they're working is really important.
How often do things go wrong?
Oh, shocking regularity, actually. It happens all the time. But it's like
And let
anything
me,
else in
but let
life,
me, but
right?
so let me actually, okay. So, but answer that. But then, because I wanted to lead the witness there. But so shocking regularity,
Mhm.
things go wrong. So is it usually user error? Is it the actual technology? Is it student error? What is it?
I would say user error is number one. Setup is right in that with a kind of the user error. And then technology is always an issue. But when I say that things go wrong regularly, some of that is perspective. So for me, if I had one student who was having a problem and couldn't get in, that's not really catastrophic for me. I would troubleshoot that. I could offer them the test at a different time. It's not critical that everyone takes it at exactly the time I was set for. Or if internet completely goes down, and I'm actually in a face-to-face classroom, but everyone's computer testing, fine, we'll actually just do the test next class and I'll move on. So for me, not really a big deal, not really something that's catastrophically wrong. Definitely something went wrong, but I recovered quickly. So some of when I say it happens often, some of it's perspective and
Mhm.
how prepared we are to have a plan in place to deal with a problem. When it comes to technology, I would say that one of the other major hurdles when it comes to someone taking the test is problems with their actual device. So they have pop ups blocked, and then now their
Mm.
proctoring software doesn't work, or they're using a really outdated version of their web browser and they hadn't updated it. And often, when you're a teacher and you're offering or facilitator and you're the person overseeing the test, that's not your area of expertise to drill down into and help solve. So that becomes a problem that's really difficult to deal with in the moment. Um, but as far as technology goes, in my experience, and as you mentioned, I've been doing this a long time. Every time technology, almost every time, I'd say 95% of the time that there was a technology problem, it was actually a user device issue and
Mm.
not the testing platform or, the site behind the learning management system or whatever where the test was being offered. It's almost always a technology or a user error problem. Either someone didn't try to access it correctly or it wasn't set up appropriately.
Mm. In terms of the BYOD universe, the bring your own device universe that we're
Yeah.
we're in now, how do I plan for that? Do I always I guess so this is where I wanted to sort of take you with that
Yeah.
question was if we see the same problems over and over again, what do I
Mhm.
do to make those problems go away, right? I mean, this is scientific management 101, right? We should be able to predict and remove,
Mhm.
right? Create those things.
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
Yeah. So I think when it comes in terms of trying to prevent this from happening, the first thing to do is always be open with your students and say to them, these are the browsers that you can use. These browsers will not work. If you try to access via these, you'll likely have problems. It's almost always something like Safari that's a problem, and things like Chrome and Firefox work well. If there is technology they need to download ahead of time, I will often ask them to make sure they've downloaded it. So if there's a lockdown browser or something they need to download ahead of time, I actually make them download it ahead of time and send me a screenshot that they've done so. I'll
Mm,
put up a practice quiz so that we can make sure everyone is able to access via their device, so they can launch the lockdown browser if I'm using one or other proctoring software. They're able to access, take the quiz, and submit. And usually, when I do this, this is not a content based test or quiz that I put up. It's something that's like ridiculous pop culture questions, just because it's meant to see that they can access things. And we try to make sure that they are able to access that quiz. You can put multiple attempts for that one quiz. So I actually leave it open for the entire semester. And I remind them to come in periodically and double check taking that test, that practice quiz before a major exam. That way, if they needed to update their browser or they run into a problem, we'll know it ahead of time. So just something very short, but it allows them to go in, spend 1 or 2 minutes, and then we can quickly determine if there's going to be, device problems on test day.
Mm. Who has more problems? The young learner who may not be able to type or those kinds of things, or
Mhm.
the boomer? I mean, I hate to
Yeah,
say it that way, but
it's
I'm working in a corporate environment, but maybe I'm not so tech savvy. Like,
mhm.
what have you seen there?
Yeah, so when it comes to bring your own device, I would say it's people in the workforce who actually have more problems because typically, and you and I know this, our corporation manages our devices, so it pushes
Oh.
all the updates. As much as we despise that, it does push them. But I never have to worry about is my browser updated or anything like
Mhm.
that. It happens automatically. But if now I'm taking a class and I'm bringing my own device, I might not have antivirus. I may have never updated my browser. I've never had to do that before, and so I find that. When it comes to that type of stuff, it's generally people in that probably to generalize older Gen Xers all the way up through because they haven't had to do a lot of this on their own. Most of their device usage is through a corporate device and that's managed by corporate policy. And so they're not needing to use their own personal device, but also because they're probably, using tablets and things like that, more mobile access too at that age. So you're not regularly using your laptop. I mean, I very rarely get on my actual personal laptop anymore. So
That I haven't really thought about that. Well, the thing that I find, I thought you were going somewhere else with the corporate
mm,
overlord in that it locks down your ability to actually change anything. So if you
yeah,
do need an
that too.
update, you then have to go through the 15 steps of contacting IT and then waiting
Right.
for that and get a ticket and blah 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 and stuff like that. But that's just prep, right? That's
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah.
And that is an issue though if in higher ed where we're issuing devices. So some higher ed institutions are issuing and managing those devices, Chromebooks, iPads. That's where we run into that problem. And so they have a network use policy and they're pushing all of those updates, but they might hold off. Maybe they didn't do this iOS update for a reason or they're not pushing this browser update and now you're stuck because your test won't work. And that's where always having access to that practice test is going to matter because if we have people go in and just quickly test on that and something's wrong, we can report it to IT right away and explain the issue, which probably would affect on a much larger scale, right? So if it's the higher ed institution managing that device, everyone who's trying to access through that testing platform is going to have a problem.
Hmm. What haven't I asked you yet? Like, I guess, now, like, I've come to the place where, I know we're 30 minutes into this conversation and I could
Mhm.
keep asking questions all day long, but like, what did you come to the conversation with? Like, no, these are the things we need to, need to put on the table. Cause you, as someone who receives help support calls, what are the ones that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I think that for from my perspective, having been on both sides of this, so I've worked obviously on the LMS support side here at Open LMS, and then I was the admin and things. I think the one thing I would say, if I could give anyone any advice, is to truly understand the settings for being able to review quizzes and tests afterward. One of the most common things that happens is a test is given, and then all of a sudden the students have access to the questions and that can be problematic because if they have access when the lockdown browser or when they're not in a proctored environment, the fear is always that they're going to share those questions. And, I'll set aside my personal feelings on if you write really great test questions, then it's
Yeah.
not really a big deal, but it does impact your statistics if people start sharing these things. Um, so understanding all of those settings and recognizing which one is going to allow them to immediately see those questions afterwards in an unproctored environment and whether or not you want that or you're going to actually do test review in a proctored situation where you're able to watch they can still review those questions. I think really understanding the settings is my number one piece of advice for people. Understanding the settings and what each of them do so that you have better control over the environment when you're offering these tests.
Cool. I have two more follow-ups. And one,
Sure.
you have said lockdown browser,
Yeah.
proctoring, these quite a few times.
Yep.
I think most people know what that means, right? At, at,
Yeah.
at least the professionals who listen to us, right? But give us just that sort of overview of what sort of layer of thought process and administration do I need to plan for if I'm going to have this third party or this other layer that's going to prevent cheating and those kinds of things.
Yeah. So, there are a lot of options out there when it comes to proctoring solutions. A lockdown browser is not a live proctoring solution. It's where the browser is locked and and the learner can only access the quiz. They can't navigate away unless I've given them special permission to do so. And a proctoring solution is often where either someone is live watching someone take a test, or we have an AI system running in the back that's recording and then evaluating that recording to see if behaviors that are considered consistent with cheating are detected.
Mm.
There are lots of things. This could be a whole nother podcast that I could do, but basically the
And
things
it
to
shall
know,
be. It shall be.
the things to know when using this stuff is you need to test that. You need
Mm.
to test it from a learner perspective, because it's important for you to understand what gets flagged as a potential cheating event. Because it could be something like, I might be someone who always looks to the side when I'm thinking. That will get flagged by most software. Or if you've allowed people to have a scratch piece of paper and they have a pen in their hand, but you don't have the option to allow that on the settings, that's every time they write
Whoa.
something or look down, they'll get a flag. And then you have to go through and review all of these. So it's really important to understand those settings, exactly what behaviors are considered at risk by the system and how they'll be flagged, how you can review those things, but also to understand just the experience of what it looks like when it launches. So um, if I test if I do my practice test in my learning management system and I'm not using the same lockdown or proctoring software that a learner will on the day of the test, I will not have the same experience. So it'll be harder for me to answer questions about what should and shouldn't happen.
Fantastic. Amy Tessitore, you have put enough knowledge on the table that I'm seriously having to question whether or not I know anything about LMSs anymore. But thank you so much for taking time out of your very, very busy day to speak with us today about what, we actually didn't talk too much about what goes wrong, but really about how to prevent
Right.
things going wrong during assessment day. Again, thank you so much for bringing your knowledge to the table, and we'll look forward to having you on that cheating podcast
Yes.
in the near future.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.